Talk, please.
Test, test. Hello, hello, hello.
Yes, now they can hear you, I think. Can they hear me as well? Yes, everything's working.
No.
Sorry about that. It's more complicated than it looks if you've never streamed before.
hmm I've had practice, so at least I can do some troubleshooting.
All right.
Your light is off, so you're like, oh, oh, wait, it's coming up.
Yeah,
There
I,
we
I
go.
I noticed that when I'm too close, it's a problem. And you can hide the ugly window. The window of doom. Yeah.
And don't worry, through the miracle of editing, I'll edit this part out on my
Yes.
side.
There we go.
All right,
Now the image is
but
clear. It looks
awesome.
like it's scorching hot outside.
Yeah, it's 90 here right now, so I can feel it. All right, so I thank everybody for tuning in, whether you're watching this live on their stream, my stream, or recorded to another developer interview for our Perceptive Podcast series. My guest tonight is from the studio Nine Dots, and as part of our bit of turnip-based festival coverage, we're going to be interviewing them for the next hour, discussing their upcoming game, Lost in Prayer. And since I don't want to butcher your name too badly, I will let you introduce yourself. So go right ahead.
All right, so my name is Guillaume Boucher-Vidal. As you said, I work at Nine Dot Studio. I'm the founder. I act there as both the CEO and a creative director. And yeah, my role on Lost in Prayer is more like I'm overshadowing the production, I guess, to just make sure that it hits the standards of Nine Dots. But it is actually not the team that I'm primarily leading, but the original concept and the intent to act in the space of the traditional roguelikes came from me. And so I'm kind of the nerd that needs to be satisfied with what we are putting out. And of course, I'm trying to be active in design discussions and just making sure that we are hitting um, the degree of depth that I feel is expected when you can take your time. So you want to have like multiple factors to take into consideration for all your decisions, and I'm playing a part in that.
Great. And for people watching us on either stream, if you do have any questions, definitely feel free to mention them. Now, I can't see the Twitch chat, but if anything comes in, feel free to let me know.
That was on my side. I'm monitoring it here too.
All right. So, I guess to get the ball rolling, and as a bit of a time for everyone, we're going to be shooting for about 1 hour in terms of this recording or slash stream. So, I'll give a kind of like a shout out for final questions about like 40 to 45 minutes in. Just give everyone the heads up. So, since this is your first time on my cast, could you talk a little bit about kind of like what is your background when it comes to game development and what is like Nine Dots about?
All right. Well, I've always been a gamer. Like for as soon as I could put my thumbs on buttons, that's always been a thing, and I feel that's important. Like there's my professional development, but the truth is, like I started imagining games and trying to think about creating them as soon as I started playing them. So I was 6 years old, and before knowing how to write, I was drawing maps of Mega Man and stuff like that. So really, my background starts from the very beginning. I studied in creative arts, especially in um, multimedia arts. I mean, and yeah, after that, I did a course in game design, and I started working in QA in 2007 for Beanox, a studio owned by Activision. I worked in QA for 3 years and decided to leave and start my own studio because what I wanted to do was create games, not just test them. Not that there's anything wrong with that profession, but it was not my aspiration. And I realized that the type of company I wanted to work for, well, didn't seem to exist. And whenever I observe a problem, my mind tends to focus on how can I solve this, and rather than try to change Activision from within as a lowly tester, I thought I might just create the kind of working culture that I believe in, and see if other people would adhere to that kind of vision and would want to go on that crazy challenge that would be to start a studio from scratch with me. And yeah, we started with a simple game called Brand, which was kind of our pilot project. Then about a year later, we started working on God Factory Wingman, which was a space combat sim in which you build your ships part by part, and it was a PvP. And then we started working on Outward, which is the game we're most known for. We released it in 2019. So all three of those games are not turn-based, and that irked me because, like, I say easily 50% of my gaming time is on turn-based games. I like to be able to just take my time. I'm a huge fan of 4X titles. I'm a huge fan of JRPGs, and for like 14, 15 years now, I've been a big fan of roguelikes, traditional roguelikes, turn-based, grid-based, and everything. So, yeah, it's been a big part of what I appreciate in the art form, but I had never done anything there. And so there came a point where it kind of imposed itself that it should be part of the catalog of Nine Dots. And as for the question, what we are about, there's the what and the how. The what type of games that we want to make has to adhere to 7 very strict design pillars. And we want to observe those design pillars across all of our titles, even if they change in genres. So the first one is to grant the player a lot of options for self-expression. So when you're making character builds, or like when you're role playing, or when you're just making decisions on your own, grant a high level of autonomy, so no hand holding, a high degree of complexity, a high degree of challenge. So, like, to us, the bar is if you don't really understand how the game works, you should not be able to continue. Like, there has to be some level of understanding of the mechanics. So, there are some games where there's a lot of things that are complex running behind the curtain, but if you just mash X and move forward, you're gonna win. We're not making that. And then rewarding exploration. That's like the 5 pillars that all go really together neatly. And then we have 2 extra flavors that we're adding to that meat. The first one is extremely memorable music, high quality music that really leaves an impression. And the last one is to address ourselves to what we call the sophisticated gamers. So people who've been playing for many, many years, who are older. Like, we're targeting people who are 30 and up, whereas like most studios are targeting the 16-24 demographic. We're going for very experienced gamers, people who've been playing for 15, 20 years very seriously, and got like those very intricate demands that they cannot necessarily find in games that are very mainstream. So that's the gist of what Nine Dots is trying to create, and the how is that we want to do it respectfully. We want to respect the consumers, but we also want to respect the art form, and we want to respect the developers. Back when I started, crunch was like endemic, and that was something that I felt was very problematic because we were just crushing human beings to produce entertainment. That didn't sit well with me. And I've always been very passionate, but I didn't see the benefit of people stopping their careers 5-7 years after they started. Like, to get to the skill level you need to work in games, you typically need to spend at least 4 years practicing intensely. And then they left the industry after 5 years on average. That was ridiculous. So that's something I wanted to fight against. There was also like all this craze about monetization and free to play and race to the bottom and all that. So that was also ways that I found was disrespectful of the player, of the consumer. They had less and less value out of that deal, where the industry was just focusing on extracting so much, to the point where I remember that the year I started Nine Dots, it was in 2011. 70% of the talks at GDC were all about monetizing, right? Rather than how to make games, it was how to extract money from people. I fucking hate that. Yep. So yeah, that gives you an idea of what Nine Dots is about.
And things have certainly like shifted a lot over like the past like 15 years in terms of monetization. Even what we're seeing more now today, with more studios calling for having like official game dev unions to try and get away from like those levels of crunch. And again, like kind of like putting people through the ringer to get a game out.
Yeah. I have a nuanced take on unions. on one side, I understand why people would want them, where it's coming from. On the other side, I wouldn't want us to replicate the model we see in the movie industry, where
Mm,
like both the people making the games and the people selling the games would focus on extracting as much value from the process. So we see, for instance, voice actors who are clamoring to have royalties on the sales of games, and it's just, but you've been in a studio recording your voice for a day. We've got programmers who've like spent literally 8 to 10,000 hours programming the game, and if we did that for everyone who's got that level of involvement, especially in large scale production, you cannot split royalty with that unless it becomes like very tiny amount, because it's just the maths don't add up unless we have a very rigged economy, which is the case of the movie industry, but not so. Like the economy of the game industry is a bit more meritocratic, not entirely, of course, but I feel like the entrepreneurial spirit would take a hit. So I'm kind of stuck in that in between two chairs as both a director of a company who's employing people and seeing like my motivation was to just create a better environment. So I guess my stance is I'm going to make a studio that treats its people good enough that they don't need a union and they're happy working with us. But at the same time, it's not like I would fight against uh, the movement of people who wants to unions, because it's true, game devs have been abused. Um, so it's hard. It's a delicate matter where everything I just said could be twisted against me in a way where I'd get like destroyed on Twitter or Blue Sky, depending on which side, because I understand both, and that makes me the enemy of both.
yeah, I think for me, I'm definitely more like unions for everyone as someone who had to work at crappy companies. And again, like I've had a chance to talk to so many people in like all levels of the game industry in terms of game dev, voice acting, QA, design, the whole shebang. But yeah, it's a topic that I think it's only going to grow louder and louder by the end of this decade. But we shall see, I guess, where the chips fall
Yeah,
in the next like 5 years for sure.
I think
And oh, go ahead.
I think part of the problem is how everything became like conglomerates of conglomerates. So there are
Mhm,
less employers in total for like I'd say maybe what 80% of the game industry is employed by maybe 50 companies, and that's crazy. And that in itself makes them as employers too powerful. But what about
mhm.
the other 20% that is split across like thousands of companies, and how can they
Yeah.
manage themselves, and how we would be shackling them to certain processes that would
Mhm.
allow them to do something differently. It, that's why I'm ambivalent.
Yeah, and for the comments on my side, regarding like monetization, Chad was saying remembers the GDC talks after like Farmville got big, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like the
Exactly.
2010s was like 2010 to 2015 was just this period of like every like major conference having some kind of like monetization angle. There's been talks about whale tracking. My friend Ramin, who's been studying the economics of games for years now, he has a lot of discussions about how studios kind of went all in to like squeeze every dollar out of the consumer base. And let's see, and game board games talked about how the worst part is that a game company can even make $1 billion profit and consider that not enough and still lay off thousands of people. I
It's
mean,
yeah.
I'm still really pissed off about the developers of Roller Drome being shuttered. I think that was last year. And yeah, like it's a very frustrating time as someone who covers a
Yes.
lot of the game industry
Yes.
to see everything that's happening.
Yeah, and I'm part of a discussion group where we just talk about data of the industry, like game sales, game budgets, and stuff like that. And there is this channel that's just called Industry Layoffs, and
Mm,
every day there's like one, two, three posts of studios announcing that
mm,
they're slacking people, or it's heart wrenching. Those people are so stuck because often they moved to work at a place and then it shuts down and they lost their safety net. They're far from their family. They're far from. Sometimes they change
Hmm.
countries, and and for what? Like I love games. Games are so important, but at the same time, it's just games, right? And we
Hmm.
forced those sacrifices on people. I I hate to see it.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's been very fascinating, and I'm sure from your point of view, from the indie space, has been we have seen so many phenomenal games from indie developers who have managed to punch way up.
Yes.
If we look at again, like the last 4 to 5 years, with everything from like Balatro, Vampire Survivors, again, my brain is like there's so many games I play that it just like overloads, so I can't think of it anymore at the moment. But there are like it is possible to put out an amazing game without needing to kill yourself or
Yes.
kill your employees.
I agree wholeheartedly. But not every AAA studio is crunching, and not every
Hmm.
indie studio is not crunching.
Mm.
So I say like working conditions tend to be on average horrible everywhere. But then there are companies that are better managed or more humanly managed.
Hmm. Yep. And unfortunately, it's kind of like the double-edged sword of the game is that it moves so very fast that no one really has like had a chance to stop and kind of establish some semblance of rules or something that can work at a multitude of these places. Because again, like as you just said, like I have spoken to indie developers who they do things as like fair or as stress free as they can. I've seen developers who have pushed themselves, working 15, 16 hours a day trying to get a game out there, and it is rough. And the nightmare, and of course the beauty of this industry, is that you'll have a game that someone spent their lives on and it blew up for them. You could also have a game that they spent their livelihood on and
Nothing.
it sunk.
Yeah. Yes. It's all for a chance that
Yep.
things work out. It's not. There's no guarantee of like, oh, if I put in X amount of hours, I'll get results. It's not like that.
And people and studios and companies try to sell you on that dream that okay, if you just do X, Y, and Z, your game will be the next 9.5 out of 10 and it'll win the game awards and you'll earn millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah. And uh, to me, the only well, it's not even something you can count on, but the only approach that I find valid is to find your own sauce, your own way of
Mm.
doing things, something that works for you and that other companies cannot take away from you.
Yep.
We're talking about monetization. Like, let's look at Paradox. If another company that Paradox did the kind of monetization that they're doing on their games, they would get dismantled online, right? And Paradox does get some flack for the way they monetize their games, but they're playing around with a very fine line. But at the same time, they have a very direct relationship with their players, and there's a lot of like those players go from one title to another within the catalog of Paradox. They've got that relationship that allows them to go in that route and not get destroyed for it. And I do believe that in some cases, uh, their games would not be profitable if it weren't for that approach, or not profitable enough to pay for the next project or for a higher ambition for the next project. So I get it. It's Schnabel Doctor says Paradox is so much better than their competition. It's true. Like you're allowed some things in exchange for just being the best at what you do.
As a very interesting point, we kind of saw the opposite effect with what's been happening with like Bethesda over like the last few years. Like Bethesda for the longest time was known as like one of the premier CRPG developers. But they were also known as a developer that every one of their games you wait like 5 to 6 months after release for all the bugs and issues to be found.
Yeah.
And then we've been seeing indie developers who have been really pushing up with CRPGs. We saw that. What was it? I'm trying to think of a few major names. Baldur's Gate 3 being a good example. I mean, Larian just, you know, became famous like overnight after the release of Baldur's Gate, but they've been doing things for years.
Yeah.
And it's something that we've talked a lot about, at least on this, from the Game Wisdom side, of being able to survive long enough to be able to get the skills and knowledge, and of course the proper game dev cycle to get a game out. Because again, like from your side, your audience, like I've interviewed dozens at this point of developers who, from like starting out, first timers, students, enthusiasts, and it is incredibly difficult to kind of get that process down when you're just starting. And a lot of people just immediately rush and say, I'm just going to make my dream game as the very first one. More often than not, that will lead to them just completely burning out.
So the most common mistake that I say, and I'm calling it a mistake, but it's not necessarily so. It depends on the context in which you're building a company. But in most cases, I'd argue it's a mistake to make a company to make a game.
Mm.
I think you have, uh, like, you should be making the company should be the goal. And if you're doing it to attain a certain vision, a certain working culture, a certain process, then quality games can come out of it. Like, good games are a symptom rather than a goal. I think is the right way to build a studio. And very early on, my team distinguished itself for being able to punch above their weight. Like Outward, open world RPG with like AA production values, was made by 10 people. And when I was talking with different publishers, I playfully asked them to guess how many people were working on that title. And usually they'd go between 40 and 100, and like, we're 10. But we found that process because to us it was important to know who we want to be. And the process was kind of informed by that. Like, we knew ourselves, what we were good at, what we wanted to do, what kind of what kind of middling we wanted to avoid from, having too many layers of hierarchy, or not being rigorous enough in our decision making that we have to come back later on and redo stuff that should have been clear from the start that it wasn't the right decision. You know, yeah. So it's one thing that I've coached a lot of entrepreneurs in games, and I'm always surprised by how little they thought about the company they wanted to make. They spent all their mental energy on the game they wanted to make.
And like to like that point, it's kind of like what we talk a lot about kind of the struggle between the art side versus the business side. That for many first timers, many students, it is all about the art. They don't think about the process of game
Mm-hmm.
dev. They don't think about what it's like to manage a team, to do marketing, social media, that whole thing. And there's nothing wrong with being very artistically inclined. But if you're trying to build a livelihood off of your games, it's a very different can of worms.
Yes.
And again, it's why there's that challenge of you can put out an amazing game, no one plays it. You can put out a horrible game, no one still plays it. You have to be very careful as to like how you plan these titles out. And it's why it is such a very risky industry.
I agree. And I would also argue that sometimes even bad games end up selling like
Yep.
crazy just because they might not be good, but they're the only game trying to hit a certain fantasy. Like, I'm thinking the survival games, especially in the beginning, like most of them were crap, but the promise was so compelling that players just jumped from survivor game to survivor game to survivor game because they wanted to live that promise with a good execution. And to a certain degree, Outward benefited from that because we were survival adjacent, right? Um, so yeah, it's it's a high risk, and how you position yourself is key. But one thing important to add as well is I don't think that business and art are necessarily a spectrum. Like, it's not you're more businessy or you're more artsy. It's more like two different columns that you need to hit to get the right product, if that makes sense. Like, I feel that we have not compromised the vision of Outward at all. It was commercially successful. Um, but what was a sane business strategy was just to be very efficient with our resources so that the amount of copies we needed to sell to be profitable was extremely low. And that gave us the artistic freedom to do what we really wanted. We couldn't have tried to make, you know, the Skyrim of Nine Dots with a super niche vision of an open world RPG. We had to target a smaller segment and kind of cross our fingers that there would be enough people like us who wanted that type of experience.
Yep. And being able to have like that balance between understanding, and it's something I've said a lot, between understanding the kind of game you want to make and understanding what the audience is expecting of that game. It sounds so simple when I say it like that, but many developers have struggled with that. Either they think so much on the art side that they don't think about what it means to do proper QA work, UI, UX, approachability, or there's so much on the business side that they end with this game that just feels very sanitized, that it
Yes.
just feels like 87 different, or the 87th platformer or first person shooter or strategy game, whatever, that no one really like cares about it.
It feels like they just finished a checklist
Yep.
rather than make a product that feels like its whole thing.
And it's why it's very hard sometimes to grow as a developer if you're just copying what everyone else has made. And again, we've seen developers who they take inspiration, they turn to something new. Even with stuff like the Bullet Heaven. Like there
Yeah.
are dozens of Bullet Heavens that just feel like a lesser version of Vampire Survivors, but there are those that manage to do something different with that. And being able to do something different is very hard to do right when you're just looking at someone else's work. And if you can't answer that question of why someone should play your game, the audience is not going to do it for you. They will never give you that advice, I can assure you.
Yeah. It's the client knows what they want when they see it, and they can't see it until
Hmm.
it's done. And even then, they cannot know they want it until they try it. It's even worse. Like it's not even seeing it. Sometimes it's just you believe it once you've played it, and that is one of the biggest challenges. It's something we're facing with Lost in Prayer right now. Um, we're kind of stuck in the middle between two worlds where there are very rabid fans of traditional roguelikes, but like they've adopted the genre without the qualities that we're bringing. We're bringing like higher production value, better graphics. We're adding like it's more accessible. We are not sacrificing the depth, but we are making it like easier to use. So you don't go through like four different menus to cast a spell, like in some traditional roguelikes that I've seen, where you have to kind of play the keyboard with your shortcuts to just cast a spell. Um, we've got none of that, so we feel we are much more approachable, even though we are staying true to the recipe of the genre, right? But that's not going to be enough to convince those who didn't care about those qualities to start with. At the same time, people outside the genre, they don't know what they're missing. They don't know how absolutely fucking great traditional roguelikes are. And so they don't have that sense of familiarity that will draw them initially to our title. So we have to convince them, hey, you know that genre that you never cared about? Well, maybe you should try it now. And that's a hard sell. Um, and yeah, it's something that we're trying to still to this day find the right angle to convince people to just give it a try and get where we are coming from. I remember when we've announced the three games that we're working on at Nidos. We've got one that we're publishing and two that we're developing internally. Like the reaction to Lost Empire was just, but what is this? Why is it not Outward? Right? The fact that it's coming from a studio that is expected to be doing something else, they feel like we're just getting distracted from our mission to just give them what they want. Um, but the truth is, like, I'm already at maximum size of what I'm comfortable with to work on Outward 2, and I have still resources and space and ambition to grow the company. And so a second team made sense. And what did we want to make to do with them? That Lost in Prayer was the first answer to that question.
I think that is also a good segue to talking a little bit more about Lost in Prayer, because we are, as a time check, about like 30 minutes or so into our recording. So if we're not careful, we'll just spend the next hour griping about the game industry before we
Oh,
talk
I
about
could
your
go
game.
on. I could go
Yeah.
on, especially
Well,
if
if
I
you're
had a
free in
drink.
the future, we can certainly have a game industry discussion. So, with Lost in Prayer, for people watching either live, record, or whatnot, what's kind of the elevator pitch for the game? Because again, you've been talking about wanting to make a turn-based game for some time. So, what is Lost in Prayer about?
So it's a traditional roguelike in which anything that kills you becomes playable, and where you choose right off the bat if you go through hell or through heaven. In
Hmm.
roguelikes, traditional or not, you keep doing the same thing over and over again. It gets repetitive. We wanted to diffuse the frustration of dying and the repetitiveness of trying from the start all over again. And so we kind of cut the problem by half by offering two different paths with an entirely different roster of enemies, change to the obstacles, change to to make enough changes that it feels fresh when you go from one run of hell versus one run of heaven, and to actually make you want to die sometimes. Like you could be in a boss fight, die, like okay, I lost, but now I can play that thing, and so mitigate that frustration with this pressing feeling of I want to try that now. I want to see what the skill tree is like. I want to see what kind of equipment they can put on, because like even the equipment slots change from one form to another. So like a turtle might not be able to wear a breastplate, for instance, but we might allow it to have floating orbs that boost its abilities, and stuff like that. So that gave us a lot of things to explore with every form, and that's kind of the bet that we made, that it would be interesting for players to explore all the different possibilities and to see that as something that opens up stuff. It doesn't make you stronger, it just gives you more options, and you get stronger but just by learning, by playing better. And that's kind of the key proposal of a traditional roguelike, where death is truly permanent, there's no meta progression, and it means that every run tension is extremely high, because like you have to do over. Whereas in when there's meta progression, getting to the end eventually becomes a cakewalk, because you kind of grinded through multiple runs until everything is kind of easy.
Now, with the Lost in Prayer, like as you're describing the systems, it sounds like it's aiming for kind of like more of a, roguelite design in terms of having carryover. So, I guess like just to clarify, when you die, you obviously switch to whoever killed you. Are there any other elements that kind of persist from run to run, or is it just simply whoever is like the last form that killed you or last enemy becomes your form for the new run?
So you keep, like, you collect all the forms that killed you, so you're not
Okay.
forced to play what just killed you, but
Okay.
you unlocked it when you do, and that's the only thing that carries over. So if over time your roster of playable forms expands, so you just get more possibilities, but you do not get stronger in any way in between runs.
All right. So with the kind of like different aspects of going either heaven or hell, is like the way like is like the win safe beating both heaven and hell, or is it just like two different endings between the two?
So we still haven't pushed forward as much as we would want the narrative aspect of the game, but we like the structure of a game like Hades, where you have to complete multiple runs to really get the full breadth of the story. So there would be this narrative meta progression, but not empowerment meta progression, if that makes sense. And of course, like what you would unlock by completing heaven runs would be different from what you get when completing hell runs.
Hmm. So with the game being turn-based, then when we talk about kind of like roguelike design, especially like turn-based, like there's many different ways of doing it. Like I can think of like very old school roguelikes, and we're even going like some like a mystery dungeon. In terms of like what the player can do, I guess like turn by turn, is this a case where it's kind of like everyone goes at the same time? Is it more like tactical battles? Like what's like kind of like how the flow of the game works?
I say it's a bit of a mixture between. Um, you played Final Fantasy X,
Let me see. I've played
so
one
you've
of
got
them.
this timeline of like the order in which everyone's gonna act, and the frequency at which your turn comes up is based on your
Okay.
speed value. So it's that, but with the tactical element. So of course, top down, grid base, and every action costs a turn, or maybe eventually a fraction of a turn, depending. So
Mhm.
um, if you move by one tile, um, that's a turn, and then if you cast a spell, that's another turn, and you need to ensure that everything you do does not expose you to getting hit, or it's very attrition based, so you kind of have to play smart, maybe a bit cowardly, avoid situation in which you kind of add on to the attrition until you are out of healing potions and stuff like that.
Okay. Let's see. Dennis in chat was saying about starting off in the game Wizard Legend that you choose or you get a random starting position that kind of keeps things a little bit fresh in terms of the beginning. And I guess like as in to build off that as a question for you, with I guess like designing the different characters, like given the notion that every enemy is essentially a unit that the player can play, how does that impact kind of like the balance or even just like the design concept for them?
So of course, that's part of why we're doing an early access. It's
Hmm.
because we know it's going to be extremely hard to nail. There's just so many different factors, and we would rather stay wild with the promise and figure it out as we go to balance using the feedback from the players. The other aspect is Louis, who's been a designer on the project, has those thought of those archetypes. So like there would be an attacker archetype, or a bard archetype, or a trapper archetype, and the forms, they don't only have unique skills. They're either a pure expression of that archetype or a hybrid between two or more. So we kind of reuse strengths and weaknesses of those roles and combine them into different forms. So there is this foundation based on, like, I think it's 10 or 11 archetypes, and then everything is a deviation of that. So making the first 10 creature was way more work than the 40 others that's going to follow.
And to kind of build off of that, with designing boss class enemies, like how does that figure in when you're trying to design a very interesting boss, but then realizing this is something that the player will eventually be able to use?
Yeah, so if a boss kills you once you play it, you're still level 1. So that gives us all the freedom to just really tune up the encounter. When you meet him, he's like maybe quote unquote level 99, and he's got like this very developed skill tree, and we can like give them buffed stats that represent if they were equipped like the player can be equipped. Um, so it's not too hard. Like, I guess, think of it this way: if you're clearing floors one by one in a dungeon, you're the boss that they failed to take down yourself, right? So it kind of makes sense. It's kind of a mirror match in that sense.
And I guess like with like designing like cool abilities, like how do boss class enemies kind of differentiate themselves from like the normal enemies?
I love the question, and I'm not going to answer because people have not
Oh,
yet encountered those bosses, and I want to make sure that they're surprised. But I think, honestly, the core of the answer is just slightly higher production value. Let them have something unique, and to not be afraid to make them, like the boss, be OP, and let the player figure it out through the toolkits that every form has.
now, another challenge of kind of like roguelike design, especially like the run length. Because we, again, you mentioned Hades a few minutes ago. Like, typical run Hades is maybe like, I think it's like 30 to 35 minutes, especially if you get like really good at the game. For Lost in Prayer, like, do you have an idea of like how long a standard run is going to take?
Yeah, that's something we've discussed internally, and we're not yet 100% sure where it's going to land. Uh, to me, like a good a good target would be maybe 2 3 hours of play to get start to finish, but it might get
Mhm,
longer than that, just because. Well, it will depend on how progression goes, I guess.
mhm.
When I play Tales of Majayal, like a single playthrough is gonna take you like 40 hours. Case of Quood, it depends just on how crazy you go with grinding, or if you're just gonna find extremely abusive uh, loopholes to instantly become super powerful or whatever, right? Um, and also since it's turn based, there are people who's gonna kind of play automated, right? And there are people who's gonna be very meticulous, and so it's hard to guess like how long it's gonna take compared to Hades, for instance, being real time, where there's a room, there are enemies, you have to clear them. It's gonna take you between 2 and 5 minutes per room, and then you get to the end, right? What we do know is we want every floor to be slightly longer than the last, so that you get to live your build as you flesh it out until it's online. Maybe make the sixth and seventh floor contracting but more intense as well. But that's something that we will figure out as we move on to make sure that to us when we play, it just feels right.
And as a bit of clarification for the different characters, do you have like any like equipables or equipment that you can put on characters,
Yeah.
or is every character kind of like stock once you recruit slash get their form?
So it's something that we had to work on because initially the equipment didn't feel like it was exciting enough, and we wanted like your character build to be really defined by your choice in equipment. And so some pieces of equipment can grant you some passive skills from other forms that you normally have access to. They can even give you some active skills. So they can really
Mhm.
be game changers. Um, and I think that having a variety of slots in itself is super interesting. So we've got this guy who's got 4 arms. So he's going to be able to equip like 4 weapons, but he's got like that big tummy. I just like the idea he cannot wear armors, but he's just gonna like go super aggro on you because he can have 4 weapons, and that might open up builds that I'm not even thinking of right now, and that's exciting.
Mhm. It also, I think, in keeping with kind of the challenge of balancing a game like this, like as you were saying, like, and I was just talking with another developer about kind of how challenging it is to have like game breaking content or how far you go with it.
Yes.
And roguelike design is incredibly true in that respect. Like for people watching us, I'm sure if you are a roguelike, either an action roguelike, traditional roguelike, or any kind of roguelike fan, you have probably had a game breaking build. As someone who has played many hours of the Binding of Isaac,
Mhm.
I can attest to having runs that just turn into instant death to the enemy before, as soon as I enter a room. From a design standpoint, it's always very hard to walk that line because you want to give the player as many cool breaking things as you can. But at the end of the day, the game still needs to be functional. You
Yeah.
can't just like player picks up a wooden stick, they're now able to kill God. Like they're that powerful.
When you have random generation, what you
Hmm.
want to make sure happens is we call them god runs, but
Hmm.
like it shouldn't be dependable that you're gonna get to that god run. So it
Hmm.
depends on like how the randomness comes up. So you should be able to win with a struggle, but at every now and then you've got that winning lottery ticket that kind of unlocks everything. If you always get there, that's a problem. If you never get
Yep.
there, it's kind of boring. Like you want
Yep.
that dopamine rush of like, oh shit, everything is working so fine now, and that you kind of take for granted you're gonna win. And sometimes that's the most dangerous part is that you become like overly confident and then
Yep.
you die and you hate yourself and you start another game instantly because like you don't want to accept that it's over because you got like too cocky. I love doing that to
Hmm.
players.
Hmm. The ever the classic like the only way to lose is you lost because of yourself kind of
Yes.
example, and yet And then you can have runs where it feels like it's horrible, nothing's happening, you're not getting that good item, and then 5, 6 rooms in, you get that one thing that just kind of starts the domino effect of you beginning to win. And that's the part of the major joy of playing any kind of replayable game like this. That you can have runs be very spiky. And what you just said about how trying to avoid making a god run be commonplace is a very important aspect of these kinds of games, because as we all know from consumers, if you make things too easy, they'll become bored and leave your game. If you make it too hard, they'll become frustrated and they'll leave your game.
Yeah, you need to hit the right balance, but at least with a randomly generated experience, they can blame bad luck, and
Mhm.
that can increase, but that can also lower their frustration because they might have made a mistake, but they can play the card of, oh, I was unlucky, and they
Or
like that's interesting how when you are if you drive a car and the car is not responding the way you want, you'll say, oh, the car is not working. And if you are describing something that you've done, you're not going to say, oh, the car like swerved right at the right timing. You say, I swerved right with the right timing. You will attribute yourself your victories and attribute to the car the faults. That's how the mind is extremely biased and way too charitable with ourselves, right? But we can like it's harmless when it's in the case of just games, right?
Mhm. And I love my chat. Chat said, "How many randomizers have ended? Like I should be able to handle any boss in my build unless it's this guy." And I think Chad just described every one of my monster trainer runs I've had in the last few times. And then Game Board Game was talking about a net hack. They had the best equipment. They were going to the final castle. They opened up the drawbridge at the wrong place, and the drawbridge insta killed me. That kind of sounds like when I played Spelunky. I like threw a rock, bounce off the wall, hit me, knock me in the pit, and I die within like that having like 3 seconds of starting a run. And yeah, like again, it's like we're joking about this, but like roguelike design is all about these like very wildly different moments. And it's again like to go back to what we were saying in kind of the first part of our discussion about not copying or a game feeling fresh or different. It's like that kind of stuff that needs to be like very heavily marketed when you're trying to explain a roguelike or traditional or action based. You have to tell the player just how off the wall things can get. That you can have a run where you're stuck with like basic peon guy and it's like incredibly difficult, or you get the perfect sword, the perfect armor, and now it's just like swing, 10 guys get killed instantly.
Yep, exactly. And I think that the most memorable runs are those where we did not get that luck, but prevailed.
Hmm.
But you don't get
Yeah.
there until you've really learned the game through and through.
Yeah.
And what will help you get there is when you did complete some of your first runs by getting lucky. That's an interesting
Mhm.
balance.
Yeah. And I think there's actually an interesting question I want to ask you about. But before we do that, as a quick time check, on my side, we're about like 50 minutes into our recording. So I know you have to be, or you want to be out just about by an hour. So are you good for like another like 10 to 15 minutes, give or
Yep,
take?
that's what I can do.
Okay. And for both audiences, and this will be officially a final call, last call for any questions about Lost in Prayer, roguelike design, turn-based design, Nine Dots, etc. Go crazy there.
Yeah.
So one thing that I wanted to ask you about in terms of kind of designing a replayable game, as we were just saying, in terms of having like God builds versus non-God builds, or even just like the player's expectations, a lot of any kind of roguelike design can sometimes fall flat when the game becomes very like set in its ways. That if I know exactly how to win, if I know the right card combinations, Slay the Spire, I know the right builds in Sharon the Wanderer, pick any like roguelike experience, it becomes very formulaic at that
Yeah.
point. Like the player knows, even with randomization, they know, okay, if I get this or this or this, I can start building a game breaking run. we see this from a lot of expert players. Like if you've like for anyone watching us, if you've seen like high level play of any roguelike experience from an inscription to a Hades, whatever, when you're good enough at that game, you can make almost any build work if you know how things go from those mechanics. So with something like with Lost in Prayer, I guess what are your thoughts or how you think about like kind of like combating that in terms of making it feel different enough on each run that you kind of avoid like those formulaic
So
events?
I have two thoughts. The first one is, if it took long enough to get that mastery,
Mhm,
eventually you got so invested in the game that it just becomes those comfy loafers you put in after work. And then
mhm,
you no longer mind that you've mastered the game. You go to the game specifically because you've mastered it. You're doing with ease what others cannot do, no matter how hard they try. And that can be a very comfortable headspace. The other thought is, and that's something we have not fully nailed yet with Lost in Prayer, but it's in the intent. A
mhm,
character should not be a puzzle. It should have like a variety of options. And like you said, you want to try those different builds. And you can like purposefully give you a handicap because you want to role play into something. Like say, oh, my character is afraid of blades, so I'm only gonna play blunt weapons. You know, something you impose on yourself a restriction, and that in itself can become interesting. You only get there if you've got enough time with the game that you become curious not only about ways to get strong, but in like flaws that you want to impose yourself and circumvent, then and test your ingenuity, I guess.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, to me, it's just like if I play the godly terrapin, this big turtle tank type characters in Lost in Prayer, there shouldn't be this one way that is so overwhelmingly good that it's the way it was designed to be. There should be like, okay, you can play it this way, this way, and this way. And sometimes I like to go counter to the meta. I'm going back to Tales of Magiel because I'm playing a run right now where I play a berserker, and everybody says like in the meta discussion of the game that Constitution is kind of worthless. That you should focus on building your health through the items rather than your stats. I was like, yeah, but I want to do that, so I made a Constitution based berserker. And if this is the run I end up finishing the game with for the first time, that's going to be a story to tell, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's the value. Is there still a story that you can kind of create out of playing the game?
Mhm.
If the answer is yes, probably you'll keep going.
Yeah. It sounds very similar to the draw of like for myself for playing a lot of the XCOM style games, where you can get really good at an XCOM. That doesn't help you if you miss that 70% chance to
Yeah.
hit, or your character gets that lucky 10% chance to hit and they survive they keep your entire team alive. And like as you were just describing, like building like a character kind of like against type. Like that I think is like another very interesting draw of these kinds of games, because you will have people who their goal is to utterly break your game. They
Yes.
will figure out the most game breaking combination, or they'll say, you know what? I'm going to use your weakest character and your weakest weapon, and I will play your game with the highest difficulty. And if it takes me 800 hours of playing, I will beat your game.
Yeah.
And then you'll see like a YouTube video. Can you beat so and so on level one with like the starting gear?
Yes. And this is always so exciting for us as developers when the player does
Mhm.
something that we thought would be impossible. I'm thinking in Hades there are those challenges that you can kind of stack to increase your difficulty, and
Mhm.
that like the developers kind of said it was impossible to finish the game if you got like literally all of them ticked. And like years later, they started to find this kind of recipe that allows them to do just that. It's just crazy, and it's
Yeah.
weird. You have that sense of pride for your players. It's not you who've done that. Like you didn't even think it was possible, and they've done it. Like it feels like they beat you, and you're glad about it.
Yep. And again, if you tell the player that they can't do something, they will move heaven and earth, or in this case, heaven and hell, to get
Yep,
it going.
that's correct.
All right. Again, like we can sit here and chat for the next hour or 2 hours. I'm trying to, because again, like if I'm not careful, we will do just that. But I do have a few kind of like very like final logistics questions, and then we'll kind of throw if there's anything else to discuss. So
Sure.
we are recording this in kind of like the very middle of Turn-Based Festival for June 2025. So the demo for Lost in Prayer is currently available. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And according to your store page, you have an estimated release date for the middle of July.
Oh, we've actually announced a date recently
Okay.
for July 15th.
Okay. So with the game going into early access, do you have an idea of like how long you're playing on early access? Again, that's a very tough question to answer
So
for a lot of developers.
my plan is to make it as long as possible
Okay.
because the games that I'm comparing us against were in development for a decade or more.
Mm.
And that's one thing that is so hard about making a traditional roguelike with the intent of being commercially profitable. How do you set yourself apart? How do you beat those crazy systems intertwined that took like a decade of maturity to get there? And of course, I cannot afford to have like five, six, seven people working for 10 years on the game. It's so honestly, I know that I will not break even on that game for a while. I know it. But maybe I never had a chance of that happening. But if I can keep it alive for a longer period, for a very protracted period of development, then eventually it might get to that size, that ambition that feels too big to ignore. That in itself, that level of complexity, that level of wackiness makes it a must play to enough people that it we get that critical mass and then maybe some movement behind it. But because we can't afford to just have people working full time on a game that is not profitable, we'll have to find the right amount of time that we dedicate to that project versus others. But I'm a very stubborn man, and yeah, when it is when it reaches 1.0, it means it will be something that I'm very proud of.
All right. And with the game, with the demo that's available on Turn-Based Fest, and with it being launched next month, I guess like how much of the game, or like what's going to be like the major parts of the demo and the early access build?
So the demo is the first three floors, and it gives you access to 26 different forms. So technically, you could play almost half the you can play half the creatures we intend for uh, for when a game releases.
Mhm.
Um, well, actually, no, that's not true because we're withholding the sixth and seventh floor probably for further updates. Now I think about it, I have to be careful about what I say. But yeah, within a relatively short amount of time, our intent is to have all seventh floor have like the final bosses and 50 playable creatures at least. Um, so the demo is pretty generous, and early access will offer like more than 5/7 of the end goal that we had in mind for 1.0, but not the level of execution yet of 1.0. So there's a lot left to do.
Okay. And I have to ask, as you were saying earlier about having like working on like different games with Nine Dots, is the studio working on anything else at the moment, or
Yeah.
planning on working on anything
So
else?
we're working on Outward 2. That's where we've dedicated most of our team, and that game is going well in development. But yeah, it's gonna take a little while still. So if people, let's be honest, more people are enthusiastic about Outward 2 than about Lost in Prayer because we've already proved our ability to deliver with Outward 1, whereas Lost in Prayer is an entirely new IP. Um, So it's kind of weird because we encourage people who are excited about Outward 2 to give a try on Lost in Prayer because both games are supporting us as creators. And it's not like the success of Lost in Prayer would like distract us from Outward 2. It's a common pool. It's like we're building skills. We're like the team working on Lost in Prayer, what they were able to do before and after making that game is going to be an enormous difference. We are investing in ourselves. Like I said, the goal is to have a strong studio culture, and that will lead to good games, great games even. But for that, like the more attention we get across our different titles, the more refined we will be in all games that we make, and not just in how we make Outward, for instance.
So we are, I think, coming right up on time. And for people watching us on either stream, I will probably be checking out Lost in Prayer for my Turn-Based Fest coverage for Thursday. So be sure to tune in, and I'll be more than happy to post that archive so everyone can watch me. Hopefully, not destroy your game or get broken by it on the stream.
All right.
So, for you, any final points about Lost in Prayer, turn-based design, anything to take us out on for today?
Um, I've invited people to play Lost in Prayer often because I am the most biased person in the world to do that, right? I encourage people to also play the games that inspired us to do that. So if you're listening, I'd say check out Path of Acra, which is like a very distilled roguelike experience where you can do a run in 45 minutes. I'd say look into Tales of Maj'Eyal, especially if you like the kind of D&D setting with the classes and races and all the different mix-ups that you can do. Look into Dungeon of Drenmore, which was my first love in that genre, and look into Caves of Qud. That is completely wacky. Like it's the only roguelike that I can name that I'd say like you should get into it just because of how weird the writing is. There are so many absolutely great games in that genre that are just being passed on for essentially superficial reasons.
Yeah. And there's definitely a discussion to be had about kind of opening up the genre to a wider audience that we definitely don't have the time to get into because that's another like 30, 40 minutes just on that one question
Easily.
alone. But yeah, like I say, if you're free in the future, especially maybe either after the early access is out or even like in the middle of it, we can certainly have a follow up chat to talk about how Lost in Prayer is going.
I'd love to do it.
All right. So, for you and for Nine Dots, anything social media wise you would like to promote or mention? Twitter,
Yeah,
Blue, Facebook, whatever.
if you do check out the demo for Lost in Prayer, it has its own page on Steam, and it's a bit convoluted to get there. But reviews on the demo page for the demo are very precious in how it feeds the algorithm. So if you want to help us out, if you do try the demo, leave a review on the store page of the demo itself. That would help us tremendously.
And Nine Dots is on Blue Sky and any
Yes.
other platforms.
The biggest one is Discord. We've got a Discord server for each of the games that we're working on, but also a general Discord server for Nine Dot Studio. That's where it is easiest to talk directly with the team. So I'm very active on that server. I'm also active on the Outward and Lost in Prayer servers, but like the one for Nine Dot Studio as a whole is where it's easiest to communicate with us.
All right, sounds good. So I think with that, we'll wrap things up for our discussion. And yeah, I'll include links to the major stuff down below in the record version, so be sure to check that out. And for those of you watching this either live or recorded, be sure to check out the demo for Lost in Prayer. That it should be, or it is definitely up now. And the game will be launching in July. So, thank you again for coming on. Best of luck with Lost in Prayer and Outward 2. And like I said, if you're free in the future, we can certainly have a lot more discussions to come.
Oh, I think it wouldn't end. It would not end anytime soon. Thank you very much for having me.
Yep, not a problem at all. So, for everyone watching, whether you're watching on my side, on Nine Dot side, thank you for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Check out I have a Discord, Patreon, do all that YouTubing stuff. Buy all the many copies of my books for all the roguelike fans out there. If you are a developer working on a game or upcoming project and would like to come on and discuss it, I'm always looking for guests for the series. And be sure to check out everything from Nine Dots down below. So, with that, come back for discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And from my side, have a great night and see everyone later for some turn based games to come.
Bye bye, everyone.